Rex said, my name is Aaron Kuntz. I'm an archaeologist for the PUD, and we've had a bit of an issue over the last few months. If you haven't heard, we had a fracture in the dam, and it's caused some serious issues. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about that. It's an ongoing issue that we're dealing with, so there's some stuff that I'm not going to be able to get into details about because we haven't gotten there yet, or it's just not something we're willing to share at this point. One thing for all of you archaeologists in the room that are just dying to hear about the details of everything that we found out there, that's not what I'm going to talk about, so sorry. What I am going to talk about is, what happened, what's our responsibility to deal with what happened, what are the major issues that we were facing, and then kind of where we're at now and where are we going with this. So, first of all, what happened? We had a fracture in Wanapum, the concrete pier that sits in between the spillways. And it fractured down fairly low, and what happened was water got into the crack and created upward pressure, so it was tipping it downstream. They determined that, our engineers determined that we needed to reduce the pool, the headwater at the dam, so that we could relieve that pressure and bring the monolith back to a stable point so that it could be dealt with. So, during the days that the crack was discovered, we were operating somewhere around 569 to 570 at the dam. We brought it down in just under 9 days to 541 at the dam. So then we bounced it back up a couple of feet, and we've operated right around 543 throughout this drawdown period. But you can see, I was trying to find a good example to show you, because it's really hard. You say 26 feet, which was what was in the press releases, 29 feet, whatever. That sounds like a lot, but until you get out there and see it, you don't really grasp how much it was. Right here, you can see that's the blow-up of it. That's our 19, 20-foot jet boat, with big roof on it and everything. And it's sitting right there against the shoreline. This is at Quelimine Bay. And so the blue line represents, where the pool normally is, basically. And if I was standing there with normal pool, I'd probably be in waist-deep water. So hopefully that kind of gives you perspective. It's really hard to capture this. So what is our responsibility? Well, we're a FERC licensed project. We have to protect and preserve the cultural resources within our project boundary. What does that look like during normal operations? We've got just under 1,300 archaeological sites on 60 miles of river, 12,000-ish acres of land, not water, but just the land. So then we have the drawdown, and we add over 4,500 acres of dry land, and just under 100 archaeological sites based on where we're at right now. So I'll kind of get into it a little bit more later, but the way we approached dealing with archaeology, the 100 sites, as we all know, a site's a management tool. That's probably going to go down because they're going to connect, and they're going to be really big sites. So our major issues, well, the number one issue was erosion. We had a lot. At the beginning, we see the water go down, and we see these big drying cracks all over the place. And there's huge moments, we're going, holy cow, artifacts are just falling down. We're getting this whole mixing. All of these sites are just going to be, the integrity is going to go to hell. We get out there, and we realize that there is the pre-reservoir sediments, and yeah, there probably is some mixing going on. But really what we were seeing is this. So that's me standing there in the water at Quelimine, And that chunk of stuff is right here, and it's 2 meters, essentially, of lake sediment that's built up over the last 50 years. Not what we expected to see in a lot of places out here because it's a river. It's not a reservoir. You know, it's not a storage reservoir. So we have moving water, fast-moving current. And to see this much accumulation in places along that main stream was not what was in our heads at all. So to put this is kind of interesting. Murphy, one of our other archaeologists, he's a soils nerd, and we went out there and he thought it would be a great idea to do like a little soil profile of this, just to kind of, who knows, learn about it, whatever. It's cool. Right there at the trowel, that's tephra, volcanic ash. And we assume that it's likely that it would be Mount St. Helens 1980. Right here, that would represent probably a spring runoff event, most likely 96, 97, when we had the heavy snows and then the early warm spring. So, just interesting. So going back to this, the primary parent material on our project is sand. Well, sand doesn't do too well when it gets wet and wet or dry really fast. And so that was one of the big factors that led to a lot of the erosion going on. We had some different types. You know, we had this big calving off of stuff too, which was a product of undercutting. There's another slide that I'll get to later, a picture that kind of expresses that at one site where that was the primary thing causing the erosion. But we had, you know, down cutting and headward erosion going on. This is at Tarpiskin Creek, and you can see right up here, you know, that if you were to get the right angle picture on it and set it side by side with something like Dry Falls or Potholes Coulee or one of those other places, Frenchman Coulee, it would look exactly the same. It's the same process that was going on during the flood that we're seeing here on a smaller scale. And for the most part, you know, it's taking away that lake sediment and reaching the pre-reservoir surface and kind of stopping. Here, this is Takayasin Creek, so it's not going to stop. The timing of all this is critical because it happened end of February, March, and so there's a lot of snow melt. We had a warm spring, early spring, and you've got all this water coming down with pretty good velocity. You can see right here, it's trying to find the path of least resistance on both sides, finds it, and follows it. Top of lake sediment, but not the lake sediment that was the surface during inundation. So that's the velocity we're talking about at some of these areas as the water goes down, and the creeks or other amounts of water that are stored in the banks are trying to find their path of least resistance down to the river. So, you know, erosion, massive scale erosion. We didn't just see it happen initially. It was bad initially, obviously. The drawdown took place over 9 days, so you know it kept getting more and more. But then we had the dewatering after that for probably, I mean, it's really hard to tell, and we didn't really measure it because we were dealing with a few different things. But you know, probably at least a month or more, it was still dewatering in a lot of places, groundwater coming out. And so, you know, it exposed, this is right here, this is a shell midden that will rival a coastal shell midden, hands down. So these are the kind of things that were being exposed because of the erosion. So every single site that we knew of that was recorded pre-reservoir was massively expanded. You know, Nelson talking about KT28, Sunset Creek, KT27 just downstream. It almost looks now like maybe those two sites are connected. Are they the same thing? I don't know. That's the kind of stuff that we're trying to deal with right now and figure out. But, you know, things got bigger. We had some sites on West Bar that increased massively in size and connected, because essentially we had the best excavation that you could possibly do at some of these places, because the sediments were just slowly pulled away and the archaeology was just laid down on the surface. So it's pretty impressive. And of course we had issues with human remains, and that was a big challenge to deal with, because it was, you know, at a frequency that is far beyond what you would normally expect in any normal situation. So, how did we approach this? Well, there were, you know, I've got these in an order, but keep in mind that all of this was happening right now. You know, there was no, hey, let's deal with this issue first, and then we'll deal with this one, and you know, keep going. It was, we've got a million different problems, and we got to solve them all today. So we had 3 archaeological contract companies on call, and we obviously utilized them to get out there and get to work right away. We had things that we knew we'd have to deal with. We knew that we needed to do a survey of everything to get a handle on, you know, what's going on out there archaeologically. Are there new sites? You know, what's happening? So that was one goal. We had to revisit all of the previously recorded sites that were inundated and see what's gone on. This is an opportunity to see how 50 years of inundation on a run-of-the-river project affects archaeological sites. So we had a crew that was tasked with going out to visit all those and do a site update, essentially. So then we had to deal with all the new sites that were showing up, which there were several, and there were some pretty big ones. And then on top of all that, and during all that, we had to document all of the archaeology that was showing up or eroding out of the bank, which was, I don't even know how to describe it. It was amazing. All of the archaeologists that we had working on this, the PIs for these companies, they're all very seasoned archaeologists, have been around the plateau for forever. They've seen a lot, and all 3 of them expressed amazement in what they were seeing, and said that they pretty much had never seen anything like it. So the artifact density that was occurring was undescribable. Oh, and going back to that, so, you know, you would think recording new sites, well, what new sites? There was a lot of work pre-inundation that took place by folks just like Nelson and Gringo and Kidd and Shock and Swanson and everybody else that was out there, you know, recording everything. What could they have missed? Well, you know, there was a lot of places that were not apparent because they were either buried with younger material, they were far back in the cut bank. Nelson talked a little bit about that at Tucannon, trying to see, is there something back deeper? One of the big ones was up around Crescent Bar. We had a new site show up that's, you know, probably a mile long, and it was covered by an orchard. Nobody knew it was there. So those were the kind of things that we were dealing with. The other big one that we had to get a handle on right away was security and public safety. So the dewatering was causing an environment where, like I said, the parent material sand, you've got this water coming out from the ground, and it's creating, you know, essentially a quicksand down at the interface between the shoreline and the water. You know, a couple times I stepped into the wrong spot and I'm up to my thigh. We had law enforcement and other emergency responders had to rescue people that went up to their waist and chest and that sort of thing. It could have been very easy for someone to die. On top of that, we had these cut banks that were, you know, in some places 10 feet tall, and hunks of sand that deep and 10 feet tall and who knows how long would just all of a sudden fall off. And if somebody was standing there and that happened to them, or standing on it, even if there was 50 people standing around with ropes, chances are they're probably dead. So, it was a huge issue. We wanted to protect people. And so we also had the archaeology issue. We needed to protect that. What are we going to do? We have a lot of agencies to coordinate with. We got in touch with them. We figured out, we need to shut this down to the public. We need to keep people out. We need to protect the archaeology, other natural resources, and people from themselves. So we entered into contracts with the county sheriff departments, state patrol, WDFW, law enforcement, and Phoenix Security private company. And we locked it all down, and it's still that way. Additionally, we got a lot of support from the agencies. Everybody was on board with this, which was also very impressive. This is an unprecedented situation. FERC supported it strongly. The agencies, State Fish and Wildlife, actually passed a law to make it illegal for people to be in the drawdown. So that gave us a lot of tools for the law enforcement to utilize to help us keep it shut. 60 miles of river with lots of access points. It's very challenging. So, this is a couple of the artifacts. Like I said, I'm not really going to get into it much, but up here you've got a pestle that these both came from the same place, and that pestle's in the neighborhood of 2,000 to 4,000 years old, whatever. And then you've got the bone projectile point. Projectile, I don't even know what you want to call that. There's only one other complete one of those that exists. There's several fragments that seem to be portions of complete ones, but the only other complete one that we know exists comes from Lynn Cooley, and it's dated to about 11,000 years old. So, pretty significant. So again, as I mentioned, it's a multi-jurisdictional project area, 60 miles of river, a lot of land, federal and state land managing agencies, grant PUD, private land. A lot of coordination went on at the beginning and is still going on today to deal with the management of all this, not just for archaeology, but for all the natural resource issues going on out there. Public recreation is an issue. You can imagine the amount of recreation that we see in the summertime. People were upset. So we had to deal with a lot of different issues. Now we're coming into hunting season. So, there's a lot of complexity to deal with there. So our FERC license, and I'll get to this photo in a second, that's the one I was mentioning earlier. We're required to deal with these things. We have a license that tells us what to do. We have a programmatic agreement that tells us what to do. We have an HPMP that we just developed recently that, again, tells us more detail on what we're going to do. Nobody expects a situation like this on a run-of-the-river project, and so explicitly was this how to deal with this situation stated in any of these documents? No. We do have an emergency clause in the HPMP that does talk about how do you handle an emergency situation, and that gave us a lot of good direction on how to sit down with everybody and move forward, which was very positive. But we'll be amending the HPMP and dealing with that. So, another thing I'll say with that is I was blown away personally with how all of the agencies, the tribes, everybody involved with this came together on the front end of it and really did a great job working together. This was a big deal, and there was a lot of really big problems that could have potentially occurred, and I think that the number one goal that everybody had was to, you know, figure out a way to manage this first, and then get into the rest of the details later. Priority one was to protect the resources, and it worked out well, I think. So this picture, this is upstream, and this is, there's very little lake sediment on top of this, and then this is all sand. And what was happening here was almost strictly erosion due to the groundwater coming out from up the hill and dewatering at the base. And so it would just suck this. You could stand there and you could watch the sand get dragged out from underneath this, and then a huge chunk would just fall straight down and collapse. And it was doing this rapidly for the first few days, and then slower for up to a month later. So that's kind of what I was talking about. So where are we at now, and how are we going to deal with this going forward? Well, you know, we've come to a place where there's some relative stability out there. I wouldn't say it's equilibrium by any means, but we've got a significant amount of vegetation growth. It doesn't look anything like it's any longer. Look at the picture that Nelson showed. We've got 3-foot tall vegetation everywhere, and so that's really helping with the stability. We've managed the river very well. I really have to hand it to the Mid-Sea Coordination Group with Chelan, Grant, and Douglas, and their management of the river throughout all of this to keep it very steady, and that's really helped us out with the erosion and stability in some of these areas. So that's pretty good. We completed the 100% survey that we were trying to obtain, and have a really good understanding of where the archaeology is, where things are capped by the lake sediments and essentially protected. It's really helped us out quite a bit. We're going to continue our law enforcement presence 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all across the reservoir until the water comes back up to normal operation. And we're going to keep it close to the public because there is still very significant risk of public safety and issues related to natural resources. So we've had the archaeologists out there, like I said, and they've collected a lot of data. Right now, they're trying to put all that together with us and figure out, you know, what are we seeing, what does it all look like, and what does it mean. We also gathered quite a bit of geologic data, soils data, etc., looking at the terrace sequence and what's happening out there. That's going to play in big. We also did a high-resolution aerial photography with LiDAR flight early on in the drawdown, so before the vegetation covered, when things were pretty fresh, I guess. So that's going to be big. We're still processing all that. It's a massive amount of data. Now, you know, then as far as the FERC license 106, you know, we need to deal with this. We've adversely affected the archaeology out there. We need to mitigate for that in some way. We're going to be doing that with our Cultural Resource Working Group, with the tribes, the agencies that are involved and have an interest in the project, and then with FERC and the Advisory Council, and hopefully find some silver lining in this situation. With that, you know, I really have to say thank you to all of the, like I said, our working group, the tribes, the agencies that helped us, you know, come to the table and get this resolved to a place that we could manage it early on. It was done well. I was, like I said, impressed and very pleased with it. I also want to thank, you know, our in-house archaeology staff, Mark DeLeon, Andrew Murphy, Brett Lenz, who's my boss. You know, if it weren't for us working together and working really hard for a few months in there, this could have gone terribly wrong. So, you know, thanks to all those guys too. With that, that's all I got to say.